diagram, when we get to the end of this chapter, I would expect you to recognize visually on a diagram, not just with a description of it, but visually where a part is. And then we'll add to that what the function of each part is, but that will come over the next few lessons. So the first thing I want you to recognize is the difference between the tract and your accessory organs, because this is a pretty big distinction. And so yesterday when we were coloring, I noted this difference, but I just want to make sure everybody is clear on why I would even point this out. Your tract, your digestive tract, or sometimes it's called your GI tract for gastrointestinal. But the tract is the place that food goes. So anywhere that food enters, that's part of your GI tract or your digestive tract. An accessory organ is something that helps to digest your food, but food is not actually going to go inside of those organs. And so at some point on a test, I will ask you, hey, is this an accessory organ or part of your GI tract? And you'll know the difference based on whether or not food actually goes inside of that organ. So we'll talk about the pieces that should be in your GI tract first. Your mouth. Your mouth is the first piece of your GI tract. In fact, your mouth makes a continuous open at both ends tube with your anus. So, are you going to be okay? Yeah. So your mouth, your throat, your stomach, your intestines, that's all one long continuous tube. They're all attached to each other. And so really, your mouth is the beginning of the same tube that your anus is the end of. I asked everybody to think about this piece, which is your pharynx. Your pharynx is the opening at the back of your throat. And your pharynx is important because food goes through your pharynx, but so does air. And so we need to have some safeguards in place to make sure that food doesn't go down the same tube that air goes in. And we'll talk about those pieces in a little bit. Sometimes it does when you are doing something perhaps that prevents the safeguard from happening. For example, if you talk while you eat, air is trying to go down the tube at the same time as you're trying to eat food, and that could be the reason that food goes down your windpipe. The way that it gets out of your windpipe, if you happen to swallow some food, is normally that you cough. If coughing isn't working and it's really lodged, someone might perform the Heimlich maneuver. And when we do the respiratory system, you'll see that the reason is that forces air upwards and air is pushing the food out. The next piece is your esophagus. It is the tube that connects your mouth to your stomach. This sac right here is your stomach. And a few people asked me yesterday, is that whole piece of tube there part of your stomach? And I said, no, it's not. Your stomach is the sac. As soon as it starts looking like a little tube, now that's part of your small intestine. So I'm just going to do this a different color so we can see. This next little bit and this whole squiggly part in here is all your small intestine. Different pictures show it a different way, but the general idea is that it's wound up really tight. So it's fairly thin and narrow, but there's quite a long piece of it. In your small intestine, there are 3 sections. And in order, those 3 sections are the duodenum, the jejunum, and the ileum. Now, visually on a picture, the way that you would recognize them, are they at the beginning, in the middle, or the end of your small intestine? So for example, the ileum, I know is that piece, because that's the part that's attaching to the large intestine, which is the next step. I know the duodenum is this beginning piece, the one that's attached to the stomach. And I know that the jejunum is in the middle of those two pieces. So realistically, it would be hard for me to ask you to identify the jejunum on a picture like this, because there's no clear-cut place where it begins or ends. And without a ruler to measure the actual length of the intestine, you wouldn't have a way to really be sure of where it is. But I could ask you, where's the duodenum and where's the ileum, because they have a clear-cut place that they're attached to. The next piece is your large intestine, and it's very often referred to as your colon. So colon cancer is cancer of the large intestine. Your colon has 3 sections, and they're very easy to see. There's the part on the left, the part in the middle, and the part on the right. And what we'll see is that food moves in this direction. It comes from your small intestine to your large intestine and goes upwards. Then it goes across, then it goes down. So those 3 pieces are referred to as your ascending, transverse, and descending colon. And so those 3 pieces would be relatively easy to identify on a picture because of the direction that they're pointing. Now at the end of your large intestine, you have the rectum and the anus. The rectum is the last portion of your large intestine where waste is stored, and the anus is the opening through which you would ingest undigested food. That is your gastrointestinal tract. Food is going through all of those places. The other organs then, your accessory organs, would be, for example, your salivary glands. They are in your mouth. Now, someone asked me where to draw them, and I said that there's actually several salivary glands, and I'm not going to ask you to differentiate between them. A few of them are underneath your tongue in your mouth. Some of them are on the roof of your mouth. But it's anywhere that saliva comes from in your mouth. Your liver is an accessory organ. And in case you weren't here yesterday, I instructed everyone that you had to add the gallbladder on. The gallbladder is attached to the duodenum, and it kind of looks like a little stick with a little sagging thing at the top of it, like a wilted flower almost. Now, in some of the pictures in your textbook, the gallbladder looks like it's faded, and that's because it's usually on the undersurface of the liver. It's not on the front where you can see it right away. So when we get to the point where we're going to do the dissection of a fetal pig, which will have an entire digestive system in it, you will have to lift the liver up to find the gallbladder. The last one is, so we have liver, we have gallbladder, and finally we have pancreas. Your pancreas is actually kind of behind your stomach. I picked this picture because you could actually see a good chunk of your pancreas, but most of the time you can only see a slight little section of your pancreas because your stomach is actually in front of it. Does anyone have any questions about the pieces of your digestive system or where they are in the picture or anything like that? All right. So now that we've taken a look at the diagram and you have just a visual idea of what things are, we need to talk about what each of those parts does. And so the first thing I'd like to discuss are the 4 processes that are involved with your digestive system. Now, it would make sense that I would ask you a couple of different things about these processes. I would ask you for sure Where do they happen? In other words, which organ are they happening in? And in what order are they happening? And so I put them in the order that they are happening in. So in order, the first thing that happens in your digestive system is called ingestion. And if you look at the word, it starts with in. It means you are putting food in. Ingestion is the intake of food, and ingestion generally starts with the mouth. Now, there would be exceptional cases where that is not true. For example, if someone has been in some sort of accident and has to have tubes attached, perhaps the point of ingestion would be lower than the mouth. Perhaps it would be the esophagus. Perhaps it would even be the stomach itself, depending on what the situation was. And so if I wanted to ask you about a weird situation like that, I would give you some context. Otherwise, I would always be asking you about a normal, healthy person who has no complications or disorders. The second thing that happens is digestion. And digestion, I'm going to put a little star beside because I'm going to talk about it again. There's more than one way that food is digested, and it happens in a bunch of different places. But generally, it is the breakdown of food into smaller pieces. So first you put the food in, then you break the food down, then absorption. That is where food molecules move from the digestive tract across membranes into the blood. So absorption is when your digestive system extracts whatever it's going to extract from your food, and those molecules move into your blood so that they can be transported. Lastly, we have egestion, and I'd like to make a note. Excretion and egestion are not the same thing. And right now, you're probably like, who cares? We're not even talking about excretion. But we will eventually, in our next chapter, talk about the production of urine, which is excretion. And a lot of the times people think that, oh, that's what happens at the end of my digestive system too. But the word we're going to use is egestion. Notice how it's like ingestion, but with an E for exit instead of an in for intake. Egestion is when you remove undigested waste remaining from food. And that's the key difference between egestion and excretion. Excretion involves a whole bunch of chemical processes where your body breaks things down to produce the things that are found in your urine. Egestion is stuff that your body didn't do anything to. So for example, fiber is something that generally you do not digest. And so eating a lot of fiber makes you have a higher volume of egested materials because your body is not breaking it down. So I put a few pictures here to illustrate what is going on. That's an adorable picture of my sister when she was a baby eating birthday cake. Then there was a picture of a snake swallowing its food whole for digestion. Then this picture here is a really good picture of what the inside of your intestines look like. You saw it on the video and you see it here. It's got little wavy hairs on the surface of it, and those will become really important. Lastly, you have egestion, which is when you're removing wastes. And every time I look at that picture, you guys probably don't see movies like I do, but there's a movie, it's old, called Meet the Parents? Where the cat flushes the toilet? Is that the one I'm thinking of? Yeah. I always think of that scene where Robert De Niro finally realizes that, in fact, his cat was using the toilet, not his future son-in-law who he was blaming everything on. So before we can really elaborate on where everything is happening, we actually have to be more specific about digestion. There are two types of digestion: physical and chemical. And so what I'll do is just pause here for a second so that you can write this down, and then I've got a little video clip to help illustrate the difference. So for physical digestion, it says that it is the mechanical breakdown of food. And I'm highlighting that word because that would be how you could describe what's happening. Literally, we're making the food into smaller pieces. So the girl in the video was eating a sandwich. When her teeth rip the bread apart and make smaller pieces of bread, that's physical digestion. It makes your food easier to swallow. Of course, smaller pieces make it easier to swallow. That's why you're supposed to chew your food well. But another reason that chewing your food is so important is that it increases the surface area for enzyme digestive action later. And that's what chemical digestion is. So without physical digestion, chemical digestion is harder. It doesn't mean that chemical digestion would be impossible without physical digestion. It would just take way longer. And so food would sit around longer. If you've ever had your mom tell you, if you don't chew your food properly, you're going to be sick, you probably will feel not well. And that's because this big lump of food is going to sit around in your digestive system trying to get digested. And it'll take a really long time if it's not broken down into smaller pieces. On this picture on the left here, it's a picture of your mouth, and I just wanted to make sure that everyone understood that in your mouth, lots of things are going on. I don't expect you to be able to name all of the little glands and pieces that are inside your mouth, but I would expect you to recognize that your mouth is accomplishing both of those processes. Just like in the video, your mouth has teeth in it that are helping you physically digest, but your mouth also has saliva being produced, and that has enzymes in it. Over here is a little illustration of what amylase is doing. Amylase is an enzyme that I've actually mentioned before. It was my example of an enzyme in our very first section when we talked about what are the functions of proteins. And this picture is illustrating that starch that you intake is broken down first into maltose and then glucose as it moves through your digestive system, and amylase works on snipping apart the little pieces. So here's a link to the first unit. Starch is a polysaccharide, so it's a large carbohydrate. And that's one of the only things that actually gets digested in your mouth. Now, the definition for chemical digestion is that we take a macromolecule and we make a smaller molecule out of it. So we're taking something big and we're chopping it apart into littler pieces. And the whole point is that we have to get through a membrane to get into your blood. If the molecule is too large, it won't be able to go across that membrane and get into your blood. Would anyone like to ask any questions about physical or chemical digestion? Yes. So we're going to talk about the different pieces of your digestive system. And we're going to start with the gastrointestinal tract, or your alimentary canal. These are all words that we could use to describe them. We'll start with the pieces that food actually goes through and then do the accessory organs afterwards. So today we're going to talk about your mouth first. And initially we will talk about how your mouth contributes to ingestion. And so there's a few points that I'd like to make sure that everybody knows. One, your mouth is the point of entry. That's the definition of ingestion, when you put things in. Unless, of course, there's some sort of situation in which the mouth cannot be the point of entry. In the back of your mouth, I'm pointing out here your pharynx. It is a common opening for both your digestive and respiratory systems. So your pharynx is just the hole, the space at the back of your mouth that when you're going to swallow, food passes through. Your pharynx is connected to your esophagus. And there's a vocabulary word here that I'd like to point out. When you take a piece of food and you chew it and you're about to swallow it, the fancy science word is that we call it a bolus of food. In the video we just watched that had the x-ray of the mouth, looked like a little round chunk of food. That's because as you chew things and your tongue and your teeth roll the food around, it usually ends up making a small circle-like shape. And so that bolus of food is moved to your stomach by your esophagus. And your esophagus does rhythmic contractions of muscles called peristalsis. So we already saw what ingestion is. I've already mentioned what the pharynx is, and we know that the esophagus is a piece. A bolus is a new word, and we're going to talk about what peristalsis is. This is something that you should be able to explain more than just maybe define. So you'll notice that I have a little animation running along the side trying to illustrate over time what's happening when peristalsis is happening. And then on the right, I have another picture that's sort of little snippets of time, what would be occurring to move that bolus of food down. So I'm just going to make it so I can see a little better. So the idea that we're discussing is that food is going to go in your mouth, through your pharynx, and into your esophagus. Now, the way that your body protects food from not going into your lungs, which someone asked me before, is by having little pieces of tissue that cover up your respiratory system opening. And we'll talk about those a little bit more when we do your respiratory system. But just so you know, you have a piece called the epiglottis. The epiglottis is just like a little flap of tissue that covers up the opening to your trachea, which is the tube that goes between your mouth and your lungs. So you have an epiglottis. You also have a little piece of tissue at the top, sort of on the roof of your mouth, where your nose is attached to your mouth. And so you have some protection from food either going into your nose or going down your windpipe. Now, that doesn't mean that food can't go there, just that it shouldn't under normal circumstances. Is there anyone here who can do things like make milk come out of their nose or out of their eye? No? No one does gross trick like? Yeah. Okay, well, I'll bring up I normally show this video in the respiratory system, but I'll find it for our class tomorrow and show you. Just because food isn't supposed to go places doesn't mean it can't. And what I want you to recognize is that your epiglottis, and your uvula are pieces of tissue that are supposed to prevent food from going someplace that it's not supposed to. But you can always push a little flap of tissue out of the way. And so I know, for example, I can do this. I can put a piece of spaghetti down my nose and make it come out my mouth. Maybe I'll bring spaghetti tomorrow and do a demonstration of that. I can't do this, but my sister can. She can make milk come out of her eye socket just by squirting it up a particular way. Usually she puts a straw in her nose and then she can make it come out of her eye socket. Super gross. But food is not supposed to go to those places. But I just want you to be aware that all of those pieces are connected. Yes? So your nose and your throat are connected right here. And then higher up, I heard someone say your sinuses. Their cavities sort of in behind your cheeks and stuff that are supposed to allow air to be warmed and humidified. And so your nose is connected to your sinuses. And then right at the top, there's a little opening for your tear ducts in there. And so that would be the space between your sinuses and your eye that are connected.
So if you like spread out most of your eye, you don't clean that stuff from
Oh, you do. Your eyes are very clean. Your eyes are constantly producing saline solution, basically tears, that are washing things away, and they do it without you even really noticing, and it's happening all the time, every day. So anyways, back to this movement of food. Food is not supposed to go down your trachea or up into your nose. It is supposed to go down your esophagus. And this picture over here is trying to show you how above the food, the muscle would be contracted, and below the food, muscle is relaxed. And so that's the key idea that I want you to gain from looking at this animation, is that above food, we contract the muscle, and below food, we relax the muscle. Doing that allows the food to get pushed down the tube. What I like to compare this to is trying to get the last drop of toothpaste out of a toothpaste tube. You start at the bottom and you push behind the toothpaste until you get it to the edge or to the opening of the container. And that's what's happening with peristalsis. Now, I'm explaining peristalsis here because it's the first time that you see it. But peristalsis is not only happening in your esophagus. It is happening everywhere in your digestive system that food is getting pushed along. This is just the first place that we happen to see it. Would anybody like to ask any questions about your mouth or about peristalsis? We'll just make this big again. So I'd like to show you a couple of the other things that your mouth does and give you some details on that. Your mouth also performs physical digestion. And it does that because of your teeth. Your teeth are there to cut and to grind up food. Plus, you have water in your mouth. Water is not an enzyme. Water is just water. And water dissolves substances. That's something that's physical. That's not a chemical reaction. And so teeth and water make food easier to swallow and to taste. And I've got here a little chart about types of teeth, plus a little picture that shows you where each of the teeth are in your mouth. So I'm going to pause here.